Darius stood beside his car, his tailored suit crisp against the cool night air. The officers circled him like vultures, their smug expressions showing they had already made up their minds about him. The arrogance in their stances, the way they sized him up, it wasn't new to him. He had seen it before. Officer Reynolds tapped his ID against his palm, chuckling. "This ID says you're Darius Coleman, the same name on this car registration. That's cute." He turned to his partner. "You believe this guy?" Officer Tate smirked. "Not for a second." Darius remained calm. "You can run my license. I have nothing to hide." But Reynolds wasn't interested in facts. He took a slow step closer. "Funny thing is, people like you don't drive cars like this." Darius raised an eyebrow. "People like me?" "You know what I mean," Reynolds sneered. Darius inhaled slowly. "I do." At that moment, the situation escalated. Another police cruiser pulled up, its tires screeching slightly as it came to a stop. Two more officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts. Tate cracked his neck, looking eager. "Looks like we got ourselves a tough guy." Reynolds crossed his arms. "We can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Either way, you're not driving off in this car tonight." Darius sighed and adjusted his cufflinks. "You're making a mistake." The officers exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. "A mistake?" Tate scoffed. "Buddy, the only mistake is you thinking you can talk your way out of this." Darius studied them for a long moment before shaking his head. "I was hoping this wouldn't be necessary." He reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, before pulling out his phone. "Put that down," Reynolds barked, stepping forward. Darius ignored him and made a call. The officers stiffened slightly as they watched him speak. "It's me," Darius said into the phone. "I'm on 5th and Lexington, pulled over by 4 officers. I need them to run my credentials. Immediately." He hung up and placed his phone back in his pocket, looking at them with cool, unwavering confidence. Reynolds scoffed. "Who'd you just call? Your lawyer?" Darius tilted his head. "Try your boss." A silence fell over the scene. Then, a voice crackled over the officers' radios. "All units, stand down immediately. Do not detain Mr. Coleman under any circumstances." Reynolds frowned, grabbing his radio. Come again?" The voice came back, sharper this time. "Do not touch him. That is an order." The color drained from Reynolds' face. Tate blinked, confused. The other officers shifted uneasily. Darius smirked. "You were saying?" Reynolds grips his radio tighter, his eyes darting between Darius and his fellow officers. "What do you mean, release him? We're in the middle of an investigation." The dispatcher's voice crackles again, this time with a sharp edge. "That's not a request, Officer Reynolds. That's an order. Stand down immediately." Reynolds glances at Tate, who shifts uncomfortably. The younger officer, the one who had patted Darius down with unnecessary force, looks between them, his confusion turning into unease. Darius, still calm, leans slightly against the hood of his car. "You should really listen to that radio." Reynolds, jaw tight, slams his radio onto his belt. "You think you can just waltz around in a suit, driving a car like this, and expect not to get checked?" Darius tilts his head, amused. "You mean, expect not to be harassed?" Tate steps forward, his tone harsher now, as if trying to regain control. "Don't get smart with us." Darius exhales slowly, shaking his head. "No, I don't need to get smart. I already am." Just then, the officer who had been running his credentials steps out of the squad car. His face is ashen, his hands shaking slightly as he clutches a printout. He hesitates before clearing his throat. Officer Reynolds, you might want to take a look at this." Reynolds yanks the paper from his hands and scans it quickly. His smug expression vanishes, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. Tate peers over his shoulder, his mouth parting slightly in shock. "No. No way." The younger officer stammers, his voice barely above a whisper. This guy isn't just a businessman. Reynolds looks back up at Darius, who now wears a knowing smirk. The officer swallows hard and reads the words out loud. Darius Coleman, CEO of Coleman Holdings, and the largest private investor in the entire police department. A heavy silence blankets the scene. Reynolds's face drains of color. The words sink in like a punch to the gut. Darius owns them. Tate stumbles over his words. Wait, you... Darius crosses his arms, watching them scramble. I own the building your police chief works in. I sign the checks that fund your precinct. I am, quite literally, the reason you have a job. The younger officer lets out a shaky breath. Sir, we didn't realize... Darius holds up a hand, stopping him. Number you didn't care. There's a difference. Reynolds, still gripping the report, clenches his jaw. His hands are shaking. Then, suddenly, another police car pulls up. This time, it's the chief of police. The moment he steps out, his face filled with barely contained rage, Reynolds and Tate stiffen like statues. They know what's coming. Darius smiles slightly and adjusts his cufflinks. I think we're about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong man. Reynolds's hands shake as he clutches the printout, his mind racing. His entire career, his entire livelihood, now hangs by a thread. Tate swallows hard, his face ghostly pale. The younger officer, who had been rough with Darius, takes a cautious step back, as if distance could erase his involvement. Darius stands calm, unaffected, watching them crumble under the weight of their own mistake. He shifts his phone to the other ear, speaking as if he's discussing a minor inconvenience. Yeah, Mike, I'm still here. No, they haven't let me go yet. You might want to get down here. The moment he hangs up, silence chokes the night air. The flashing police lights feel harsher now, illuminating the raw fear on the officers' faces. Reynolds, desperate to salvage the situation, forces a stiff laugh. Listen, Mr. Coleman, this is all just a big misunderstanding. Darius lifts an eyebrow. Oh? A misunderstanding? Tate quickly nods. Yeah, we thought... You thought what? Darius interrupts, his voice still level, still composed, but carrying the weight of someone who is done playing games. You thought I didn't belong in this car, in this neighborhood? Or did you think a black man in a suit must be a criminal? Reynolds's mouth opens, then closes. He has no excuse that won't sound like exactly what it is: blatant discrimination. Darius steps closer, staring him down. You weren't stopping a suspect. You were stopping a story you made up in your head. The younger officer looks down, shame creeping up his face. Tate glances at Reynolds, silently pleading for him to fix this, to say something that could undo what they've done. But nothing will. A new set of sirens wail in the distance, approaching fast. Reynolds flinches. The chief of police has arrived. The squad cars barely stop before the doors burst open. Chief Michael Thornton steps out, his face twisted in barely contained fury. The sheer authority in his stance makes even the other officers on the scene take a step back. Thornton storms forward, his eyes locked on Reynolds and Tate. Tell me you didn't just do what I think you did. Reynolds stammers, his voice cracking. Sir, we... Shut up, Thornton growls. He turns to Darius, his entire demeanor shifting. Mr. Coleman, I am so sorry this happened. I can assure you, these men will be dealt with immediately. Darius watches as the officers tremble under the chief's gaze. He sighs, glancing at his watch. I was on my way home, Mike. Then these two decided I didn't belong behind the wheel of my own car. Thornton's nostrils flare. He turns sharply to Reynolds and Tate. Hand over your badges. Now. Reynolds' eyes bulge. Wait, sir. I said now, Thornton roars. Reynolds hesitates for a split second before reluctantly reaching for his badge. His fingers tremble as he unclips it, his face drenched in sweat. Tate follows, his expression hollow, as if he knows this moment will haunt him forever. The chief snatches both badges out of their hands, shaking his head. You just threw your entire careers away because of your own ignorance. Darius, watching the scene unfold, finally exhales. His patience has been tested, but justice is being served. Thornton nods toward the younger officer, the one who had been silent since learning who Darius was. What about you? You have anything to say? The young officer looks down, ashamed. I should have stopped them. Thornton grunts. You damn right you should have. Darius steps forward, looking the young officer in the eye. Then remember this moment, because next time someone might not be in a position to fight back. The young officer nods, his face tight with regret. Darius then looks back at Reynolds and Tate, who stand stiff, their pride shattered. You wanted to teach me a lesson tonight. Turns out, I was the one teaching you. And with that, he buttons his suit jacket, straightens his cuffs, and walks past them, leaving them frozen in the mess of their own making. The weight of Darius's words settles heavily over the scene. The officers, who had been so smug just moments ago, now stand frozen, their mouths slightly open, searching for a way out of the disaster they created. Their entire world is crumbling around them, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. Darius, still impossibly composed, places his hands in his pockets and glances toward the chief of police, who has been silently watching the scene unfold. Chief Thornton's face is a mask of barely contained fury, his eyes burning into the disgraced officers. Mr. Coleman, Thornton says, his voice tight, rest assured, these men will never wear a badge again. Reynolds takes a desperate step forward. Chief, please. Thornton's glare cuts him off instantly. Don't even try. I warned you all about this kind of behavior. I told you there'd be consequences. His eyes shift back to Darius. And now, you're gonna learn just how serious those consequences are. The young officer, still looking ashamed, exhales sharply, stepping slightly away from his colleagues as if disassociating himself from them completely. Darius notices. He tilts his head toward the young man. What's your name? He asks. The officer clears his throat. Parker, sir. Darius nods, studying him for a moment. And what did you learn tonight, Parker? Parker swallows, then speaks with quiet conviction. That silence is just as bad as action. I should have spoken up. Darius's gaze lingers on him for a second longer. Then he nods approvingly. Remember that. He then turns back to the disgraced officers, whose arrogance has now fully melted into terror. Tate looks like he's about to collapse. Sir, please, I have a family. I can't lose this job. Darius remains unmoved. You should have thought about that before you abused your authority. Reynolds grips his head as if the reality is only just setting in. It wasn't personal, sir. We just... Darius steps closer, his voice cutting through Reynolds' excuses like steel. It's always personal when it happens to people like me. You don't even realize the damage you cause. But tonight, you're gonna learn. Reynolds' lips tremble, but he stays silent. He knows there's no way out. Darius finally sighs, pulling out his phone again. Mike, make sure the paperwork's handled by morning. He hangs up and gives one last glance at the men who thought they had power over him. But don't worry, he adds with a smirk. Since you two are so concerned about people belonging somewhere, I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to reflect on where you belong now. He adjusts his cufflinks one last time, then turns toward the chief. I'll expect the final reports on my desk first thing, Darius says. Thornton nods, his voice full of quiet respect. You got it, sir. With that, Darius steps back into his Rolls-Royce, the powerful engine purring to life. As he drives away, the officers stand in stunned silence, their entire careers, reputations, and lives shattered in a single night. Justice had been served. As Darius settles into the plush leather seat of his Rolls-Royce, he watches through the side mirror as the two officers stand frozen in shock. The reality of their downfall has yet to fully sink in, but it's coming, fast. The black SUV's doors swing open, and out step two high-ranking police officials, their expressions unreadable, but their presence undeniable. Chief Thornton steps forward, his hands resting on his duty belt as he glares at Reynolds and Tate. The air is thick with tension. The officers shift uncomfortably, sweat forming on their brows. A small crowd has gathered nearby. Other officers from the precinct, bystanders watching curiously, and even a few patrol cops who seem to understand exactly what's happening. "Officers Reynolds and Tate," Thornton finally says, his voice carrying a weight of finality. "You are hereby placed on immediate suspension, pending a full investigation into tonight's incident." Reynolds stiffens, his mouth opening and closing as if his brain is still scrambling for a defense. Chief, wait, this is all a misunderstanding." Tate, realizing the severity of their situation, takes a desperate step forward. "We were just following procedure, sir. He was acting suspicious." Thornton's face darkens. "Suspicious? You pulled over one of the most powerful men in this city because he was suspicious?" His voice sharpens, slicing through the cold night air. "That's not procedure. That's racial profiling." Reynolds' face flushes. We didn't know who he was." Darius watches from the rearview mirror, his smirk barely hidden. He presses the button to roll down his window slightly. "That's exactly what you told me 10 minutes ago." The silence that follows is deafening. One of the high-ranking officials steps forward, shaking his head. "Hand over your badges and service weapons now." Reynolds and Tate hesitate, but the glare from Chief Thornton leaves no room for argument. With shaking hands, they unclip their badges and weapons, placing them reluctantly into the outstretched hands of their superiors. The weight of their actions has finally caught up to them. Darius leans back in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate ease. He's seen men like them before, officers who abuse their power without a second thought. But tonight, they learned a lesson they wouldn't forget. As his driver eases the car forward, the last thing Darius sees in his mirror is Reynolds and Tate being escorted toward the police SUV, their once arrogant faces now filled with humiliation and dread. Justice had been delivered. The next morning, Darius sits in his penthouse, the skyline stretching before him as the soft hum of morning traffic fills the air. The massive flat-screen TV on the wall flickers with breaking news. "Police officers fired after racial profiling incident goes wrong," one anchor announces. Another station displays a headline in bold letters. "CEO of Police Oversight Fund humiliates corrupt cops on camera." Darius smirks, taking a slow sip of his coffee. The very men who had sneered at him the night before were now plastered across every media outlet, their careers in shambles. His assistant Julia walks in, tablet in hand. She glances at the screen and chuckles. "Looks like your little traffic stop made quite the impact." Darius leans back in his chair, stretching slightly. "They thought they could intimidate me, that I was just another black man in the wrong place, in the wrong car." He shakes his head. "Now the whole world knows better." Julia tilts her head. "So are you going to replace them? Fill their positions with better officers?" Darius lets out a dry laugh, setting his coffee down. "Nah," he says. "Let them sit with their mistake. Let them wake up every morning realizing they lost everything because of their own arrogance." He leans forward, his expression turning serious. "Maybe next time they'll think before they judge." Julia nods, impressed. "Cold. I like it." Darius turns back to the city skyline, the golden sunlight reflecting off the towering buildings. His power wasn't just about money. It wasn't about status. It was about knowing when to wield it, and when to teach a lesson. Last night, he hadn't just defended himself. He had set a precedent. He had sent a message loud and clear. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And discrimination always comes with consequences. As he takes another sip of his coffee, the news continues playing, reporters dissecting every moment of the viral incident. Darius simply smiles, because today, the world was watching, and justice had already been served.